Hi, welcome back to Plan 9 Crunch. I am Joe Gibson. Now, in all my time talking about Godzilla here, I have been quite open about my disdain for Polygon's Godzilla anime trilogy. In the deepest part of my being, I know that these movies, they're terrible, and among the worst the franchise has to offer, and I have never really given myself the opportunity to lay out my best arguments for that case. However, even now, I don't want to do that. Let's set aside how that is poisoning the well to the audience about experiencing what is perhaps the most niche sector of this franchise that still involves future films. It is just not that interesting to me to try to tear down a trilogy without some nuanced gimmick. I have also grown to appreciate these films in their own way. The design for Godzilla Earth, while slow, immobile, and barely qualifying as something only animation can create, it is actually probably one of my top 10 favorite designs for Godzilla. I just think it's neat with its sleek muscle patterns and very memeable face. I also have a kind of warped nostalgia for these films because I was there, following along with the updates before the films came out, catching every new report about what the first Godzilla anime would be like. I witnessed when the officially reported title for the first film changed from Godzilla Monster Planet to Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. And I was there when we got early translations for what would eventually become City on the Edge of Battle as Mobile Battle Breeder City. In both cases, the earlier title was technically more correct to the film than the later, but that's not the point. I have experienced both hype and letdown with this trilogy. And I'm really not that devoted to trashing on it outside of throwaway jabs and tangents and other videos. That said, I still think the trilogy deserves a negative video essay exploring some of my issues with it. One common critique of the trilogy is how derivative it seems of Attack on Titan. And don't worry, I'll unpack what all that means in a second. But the discussion I want to create here is that the Godzilla anime trilogy is very much like AOT, but far less mature in its storytelling and implementation of themes. And this is important to note, even though I am using Attack on Titan as the positive example by comparison, my criticisms will not simply be, this is not what Attack on Titan did, so it is bad. That wouldn't really make much sense. This trilogy never had a chance of doing exactly what AOT would do, because that manga was still ongoing when this trilogy was in production. Heck, this trilogy managed to preemptively include a plot point from AOT before it even got there. I'll explain that when it comes up later in the third film. So if that were my metric, rest assured it wouldn't be an unfair hindrance to these films. So how else do I frame the comparison if not living up to a source material? Well, have you ever heard of the expression that X thing is like Y thing on crack? As in crack cocaine? The drug? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Essentially, it is a comparative tool wherein I acknowledge base level similarity, but through the lens of a hyperactive, frenetic, or melodramatic exaggeration of certain elements. The problem is that it does not really work in this instance, though undeniably similar. As we will get to, the anime trilogy is a lot more subdued and restrained than the comparative high-energy battle anime that is AOT. Okay, so then it was all about finding a different drug with the desired exaggeration from AOT's tone. And that was difficult to find with an innocuous Google search term. Eventually, I settled on PCP, so please indulge me as I run through the side effects of PCP you'll want to keep in mind. This part of the video is technically a drug abuse PSA, so if the YouTube algorithm suppresses the video, I shouldn't finish that thought. On that note, though, this essay will discuss topics pertaining to drug abuse, obviously, but also depression and suicide, so viewer discretion is advised. Fesiclidine, known for the purposes of this essay as PCP or angel dust, is a hallucinogenic and dissociative drug that can lead to many side effects, but especially lethargy, disorientation, hallucinations, sense of detachment, lack of concentration, loss of coordination, agitation, bizarre behavior, a dangerously inflated sense of strength and invulnerability, memory loss, and unconsciousness. I am getting this information from AmericanAddictionCenters.org. The image you see on your screen is from the CarolinaCenterForRecovery.com and adds suicidality and coma to this list. So basically the methodology of this exercise is to pinpoint how the anime trilogy expresses themes about humanity and see if the tone registers with a certain disorientation and sense of detachment or lack of concentration, or if the choreography entails a sense of lethargy and relies on unconscious hallucinations, or if the ways the characters act are informed by the side effects of dissociative drugs instead of rational acting. If the lead, for example, demonstrates violent suicidal behavior, delusions of grandeur, a sense of detachment from his life, stupor, and notable memory loss, then there you go. So, there you go. I think it is a fair criticism to say that the emotional maturity of the series is akin to that of someone addicted to PCP. Yes, and the ways people abuse PCP are plentiful. It can be a white powder, the angel dust, a yellow liquid, a tablet, eye drops, an injection, or a cigar. So very adaptable, and I think ultimately very fair to use for such a sweeping analysis. In any case, let us proceed to some background information on the trilogy itself, so we can actually begin this analysis proper. Between 2017 and 2019, Netflix released 3 Godzilla anime films, animated by Polygon Pictures. These were to be Godzilla's first official feature film foray into animation, though as I understand it, the 2021 Netflix series Godzilla Singular Point went into production or was ordered first. Recently, I have heard commentators posit that the trilogy is not really that good of a demonstration to anime fans what Godzilla represents, nor to Godzilla fans what anime entails, and that is largely because the style of animation was a costly 3D CG that simulates live action but resulted in a very sluggish Godzilla with very little screen time. It is as costly to animate humans walking as it is Godzilla walking, so there you go. A limitation in the technology, same as the goofy suits between 1955 and 1975, also a very experimental format that settled the uncanny valley. In regards to how tokusatsu and anime are usually shot, consider the way that this 3D CG style distorts our sensory perceptions of the ways characters can move and their body awareness. Like with PCP, the premise is equally uncanny between old and new. Traditional and experimental giant monsters have pushed the remains of humanity into one cramped area. That's the Attack on Titan part. But it is to the spaceship Aratram, and well, humanity is in space. For 20 years before they decide to come back, 20,000 years have passed on Earth. The Exilian and Simian aliens from the Showa series are back, but as members of this defeated coalition, as their plans to defeat the monsters have failed. Also, it is best to get this out of the way now. The Exilians became the Aryan Exif aliens, and the Space Monkey Simians became the dark-skinned humanoid Bilosaludo aliens. This is not a critical race theory essay, so I'm not going to read too deep into that, except to say they act more like deconstructions of fantasy elves and dwarves than they do real-world stereotypes. It's just really, really unfortunate that that's the way they decided to animate them. The lead character is Captain Haro Sakaki, and you can recognize his first name from the original Godzilla film, suit actor Haruo Nakajima, and his fierce and petulant anger, Haruo's, not Haruo's, from Attack on Titan's protagonist, Eren Yeager. But as you will soon find out, there's a lot more to talk about this trilogy as a whole than just what came before. Still, maybe I should expand on that history first. Running between 2009 and 2021, Attack on Titan, originally called Shingeki no Kyojin, is a very popular manga and anime series by Hajime Isayama. The basic premise is that man-eating ogres called Titans have forced the remnants of humanity that they've not already killed into German towns housed within 3 massive walls, and everything seems to be somewhere between medieval times and the 1800s, though the title of Episode 1 clarifies that 2,000 years of history are relevant to this world. Within the desperate struggle to survive, one teenager is angry enough to try and fight all the Titans to reclaim his world. That is Eren Yeager, and his best friends Mikasa and Armin seem skilled and smart enough respectively to help him achieve his goal if they and their allies can survive long enough to see it through. I am trying not to spoil too much. Yet. But that is roughly what you'll need to understand going into the first few arcs of AOT. After that point, twists and turns abound with realistic government corruption, dangerous political intrigue, betrayals, doomed love, war crimes, and a final stretch that decodes the subtext of the Titans and lays bare as text what the whole story was really about the whole time. I think it is really a masterclass and an amazing political thought experiment while delivering on amazing fight scenes. Not everyone sees it that way, I'll admit. And fair enough, Attack on Titan is not on trial today. Maybe you will prefer the approach of the trilogy. With all this context out of the way, let us begin. So the title is Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, but what if I call it Godzilla Planet of PCP? In this film, Haruo is the driver on the mission to return to Earth. Put as simply as possible, he comes up with a battle strategy that could have defeated Godzilla in the past and motivates his human, Exif, and Bilosaludo allies to help him test it out. Haruo is very clearly an Eren XP because of his tragic backstory and how that shapes him into an angry, yet cunning, and charismatic leader among his equals. Eren always wanted to fight for his freedom, even when he was a child, but in episode 1, we are there with him when Titans breach Wall Maria and eat his mother in front of him, and from that point on, we empathize with him and understand why he takes military training so seriously, and how he inspires the other cadets in the Battle of Trust. Even though Haruo also witnessed Godzilla killing his parents, traumatizing him as a child, the introduction we get as the audience to him is not that, but we see him attempting a suicide terrorism, threatening to blow himself up in an effort to prevent their scout ship from leaving to a nearby prospective planet. Okay, there is more to it than just that. Haruo justifies his dissidence by giving an argument that the Central Council is knowingly sacrificing the elderly people aboard the ship just to make sure there are less mouths to feed. This isn't really confirmed, but I'll accept it. This is driven by necessity with willing participants, as we find out, but still represents an inability of the existing governmental structure to take care of its people. The plot point of sending the elderly on a mission outside the walls also appears in the AOT, and it was the first of many scenes showing a logical but terrible human cost to survival, raising the question of if it is worth it. This trilogy does not have the same time or space as a 4-season show, but, this as the introduction to the question is sufficient and snappy. Gets you engaged. Haruo is vindicated when the scout ship explodes, and we will return to that in a while, but he's remanded into military custody. And then we learn his backstory. Why, oh why did they choose to write it that way? Now, PCP is not the reason this trilogy is the way that it is. That's post-hoc wishful thinking. Gen Urobuchi was the writer, and Kobun Shizuno and Hiroyuki Seshita co-directed. As I understand from the post-mortem interviews after the fact, Gen Urobuchi is to blame for the nihilism on display in the script. Seshita brought an enthusiasm for using the Godzilla IP and its staples to bring in a new audience of women and children, and Shizuno had no prior knowledge of Godzilla and adjusted the other two men's suggestions into new trajectories, so stuff like the technology obsession and worship migrating from the Exilians to the Bilosaludo is more likely an inconsistent reference changed by Shizuno than the work of Seshita or Urobuchi. And well, from Gamma Rebirth, we know that the details of Void Ghidorah were precious enough to Seshita to retrofit onto Virus, though with a more weighty flesh and blood fight. So all this to say that yes, a trio where one man is writing a depressing treatise on nihilism with franchise references, another guy loves the franchise and wants to expand the audience, and the third guy has no clue of the first thing in the franchise and shoots down or warps the other two guys' suggestions is absolutely a scenario that fits the PCP abuse side effects of lack of concentration, sense of detachment, and memory loss in a unique way that I hope you all can appreciate. In Attack on Titan, despite the protagonist through the entire run and the main character by runtime for the first 3 seasons being Eren, he's not the narrator. His friend Armin is, and that immediately works into the themes and tone the show is portraying. Armin as a character has an unparalleled hope for the future, and framing Eren through his narration allows for us to see a great range of Eren's emotional capacity. In Planet of the Monsters, Haruo gives the narration of the backstory of the monsters and fall of humanity, and again, the way that we explore these events through his perception and worldview are very bitter and so angry. He has characters to balance out his extremism, but the script does not elevate them to major characters until the sequel. And also, it kills me that right after Haruo's failed suicide terrorism, almost every shot has warm hues cast over it and lights going in and out of focus that make it hard to focus on what we're seeing. But when he literally narrates that he still remembers the flames from Godzilla's destruction, the shot is literally the clearest blue it could possibly be. And yes, I bet you didn't expect so early to find a match to the blurred vision and dizziness PCP symptoms, but yeah, I did not even draw too much attention to those, but already the film is playing along with me here. That's nice. Alright, so this whole visual element is actually very odd because the characters make a point of space and the Eratrum being functionally a frozen hell. The planet that they are seeking, Taui, is warm, so it is more interesting to look at the complicated shots that incorporate both. but the juxtaposition would be better served if Earth were that vibrant space. But it's also just blue, and Mechagodzilla City, a major environment in the second film, is also a dead and sterile environment. So there's not much contrast, so they had to put the interesting shots on the spaceship, whatever. Okay, back to the guided narration. I actually am a proponent of telling and not showing a good deal of the time. There simply is not enough time in a movie to show everything you need to get across to the audience, especially in diegetic ramblings. I mean that more in regards to kaiju started appearing in the late 1990s, Godzilla came last and was unstoppable by human or monster, then aliens came, they also failed to stop him, the survivors evacuated. Haruo has a very personal connection to Godzilla that takes a more show-don't-tell approach, but the majority of the information in this flashback has to be told, not shown. Still, I do criticize Haruo's moment with Godzilla because I think he could have communicated his point better overall, and actually AOT does that plot point better, so we'll look at that again. When it comes to Godzilla's emotions and intent, he is often ambiguous, especially now that we don't have the benefit of a human acting in the suit. It is very difficult to understand Shin Godzilla's motivations just looking at him moving forward and spewing beams. Actually, ironically enough, that film has to tell us through the non-diegetic lyrics of who will know what is going on in his head. That's not a critique of Shin Godzilla, just evidence of my point. He's hard to understand, especially when he's a beam-heavy creature. The Godzilla in -1 is much more easily understandable because you can see his rage when he steps on people, tears through buildings, and tries to bite the Shinden. The tooth and nail destruction Godzilla does in the original film is the most visceral, and the crocodile melee crawl and slashing of Kong's torso that he does in GVK sticks with you as much as his best atomic breath finishers do. Eren Yeager has to witness a very disturbing smiling titan eat his mother in front of him. And Haruo has to witness Godzilla shoot down a transport that also contained his parents from pretty far away. This is not a measuring contest, but let us compare for a moment how hard of a punch that packs. Eren is ripped away from the rubble of his home, dragged as he tries to go back and save his mother, while Haruo is at a much safer distance, dragged and unable to go back for a necklace. Well, we don't see his parents die. Yes, there is such a thing as subtlety. We'll actually soon get to why I don't think this trilogy understands it. But this is supposed to be the motivation for us to follow Haruo on his journey because of our attachment to revenge for what Godzilla did to him. It would be a small change, and admittedly might balloon the budget because the art style would pay dividends to have Godzilla actually crush Haruo's parents with his foot, and then we see how Yuko's grandfather saves him so that his death on the emigration shuttle of Sinigo now retroactively carries more weight. This is a minor point, let's carry on. Haruo finishes his recap monologue by asking variations of the same question. Why? Why are they still alive? Why did that happen? Why are they still alive? Why did this happen to them? And those are what we have to examine throughout the film. But he also states that kindness and pride are gone in the Zeratron culture. For one thing, the film will later prove him wrong on the kindness part, and he is very clearly prideful by thinking he is the only one who can or wants to draft a plan to defeat Godzilla. But genuinely having thought about this, I think the only reason he said that is so that we can have the immediate juxtaposition to Metphius being nice to Haruo and think, maybe this guy's manipulating him since kindness is dead. Metphius, of course, being derived from Mephistopheles. He is the main Exif character, and I guess priest in their religion, who offers forgiveness rites to prisoners and has a close relationship with Haruo. He can't possibly be a good guy. Laid on pretty thick. Anyway, the way that this trilogy builds up to its plot twist in comparison to AOT is a lot more simple. What if the character that is high up in a cult and literally gives Haruo information about the past while lying to the council is lying to and manipulating Haruo's psyche and memories, is one such example. Also, let's have Haruo ask if the reason that happened to them is that it was an inevitable punishment for humanity, but then he says no, and that is because they did not give it their all against Godzilla, so that when this trilogy ends and they all fail to kill him again, the only other option on the table is that it was a punishment for humanity and their technology, when Godzilla, especially one made of plant life, could come from literally anywhere for any reason. Kind of a cheap tactic to whittle down the options for what Godzilla could mean by having a character say, it can't possibly be that, and then it just is. Anyway, I do not want to say, well, this is an AOT, so it's bad. It's inviting comparison by ripping off AOT and then self-aggrandizing over its themes and foreshadowing, even while it strips down on the amount of characterization and action that went hand in hand with AOT's reveals. Anyway, so Haruo releases his manifesto / Godzilla battle plan, and it is important enough for the council to discuss it among their bleak survival possibilities because everyone on the ship is reading it. Earlier, Haruo broadcast his terroristic opposition to the Taui emigration to the entire ship. And this matches especially how, pre-Trost in Attack on Titan Season 1, Eren was so charismatic, setting a standard for grit and determination that inspired the other cadets, notably before he had to watch some of them die too. Eren ends up questioning himself a lot after that, but the point that I'm making here is that we are entirely replacing the other cadets seeing Eren barely manage to balance in a trading ODM gear, then realizing it was busted and that he did something more impressive than any of them because of his grit and determination. We're replacing that with broadcasts and an anonymous battle plan. This is where the movie should have shown instead of telling us that he's influential, is what I'm saying. Still, this is when the film actually begins to introduce us to more characters. Colonel Leland, Dr. Martin Lazary, and Adam Bindelwald are all white blonde humans with the major design difference being their hairstyle. Again, they're in identical spacesuits, so it's just the hairstyle where they're parted, if it's frizzier or not. So Leland will put a pin in since he's my favorite character in this whole trilogy. Adam winds up in Mephistopheles' cult, though in most of his scenes he's just taking pot shots at religion. You'll see how he gets there, kind of. In his introductory scene, he's very cynical about how, quote, the ship leaders turn to the gods as usual, and Martin will give exposition about nature, but also becomes anti-religion once Kenner-Buchi decides Adam isn't, I guess. We have had several shots of Yuko Tani reacting to things, and Mephistopheles has a conversation with one of the Vilosoludo, Mulu Ilu Galugu, which reveals they're on the same page about using Haruo's research paper to undermine the committee and return to Earth. As the flashback briefly showed, Galugu was behind the failed Mechagodzilla project, and Mephistopheles speculates that, had it worked, Mechagodzilla would have then subjugated humanity. This is after Galugu insists that the purpose and aim of the Exif's cult was to subjugate humanity. And that's certainly a way to write two twist villains talking to each other about how they wanted to take over humanity. Anyway, Adam's friend Marco sits with some of the other characters who voice an earnest wish to see the real Earth and see the ocean. And if you've experienced Attack on Titan, particularly Season 3, you will know, you'll have in your head how this story would be able to leverage so efficiently two characters talking about wanting to experience the sea. It is the dream that Eren and Armin share, but gradually begins to take on a different meaning for each of them. Here, a bunch of nameless extras gather around and instantly see a blue ocean, gazing at how beautiful and blue it is when the ship that it was their hell was the same color of dull blue. Haruo even has his moment of angrily staring at the sea and seeing only their enemy, when Attack on Titan used these same pieces to paint a much more poignant picture. This is not about Attack on Titan, it's just about how the trilogy's immaturity seems to manifest as a diluted version of Attack on Titan. The sea obviously is not the symbol they chose for all of this. What represents humanity for Haruo is flowers, specifically the flowers of spring that he got his name from, that we'll find out literally in the last third of the last film of this trilogy. So it's still bad. Still not a consistent enough symbol throughout the thing. That's also the necklace that he dropped earlier. We'll circle back around all of this. The focus of this scene here is not on the sea, it's not on the Earth. It's about the scout drones scanning the new Earth and finding Godzilla. Earlier, Eren's charisma was replaced by Haruo utilizing technology, and his strategy for defeating Godzilla hinged on details he can only find out through Mephistopheles' technology and the Gimatron calculator, so it is official that as a motif, this trilogy is diverting away from more personal human connection and ingenuity into using technology. And that'll be important come film 2. The captain of this vessel, Umberto Mori, realizes with horror that although thousands of years have passed and the terrain has changed, Godzilla still remains on the planet in some form. Haruo also realizes somehow he doesn't have the benefit of Martin Lazary's dissertation to the council on how Godzilla cannot be considered a normal living creature, and thus any number of explanations could explain how he's there. Haruo just knows he is. Mephistopheles pushes for the extermination of Godzilla. He's on the committee. And negotiates dropping the charges on Haruo, thus revealing that he wrote the thing. And now Haruo is in front of the committee explaining his plan as good diegetic exposition, until it dips into literal as-you-know dialogue. And I'm reminded of my feelings for the trilogy. Mori opposes the plan because it will cost lives, and he does not want to risk the 600 people Haruo needs. Deputy Director Hamamoto also declares it out of the question. Somehow, Haruo gets his way anyway in a Gilligan cut. So I'm not really sure of the cause and effect that got us to this point from one scene ago. The council members were discussing how it would drastically affect public perception of them if they were unable to land on Earth, and we never saw Maury too upset about sacrificing the elderly to Taui, even if he didn't think it would happen. The calculation given in the film still revealed it's not optimally a safe planet. Unless the ex-Sif and Bila Saludo came together to strong-arm the literal captain of their ship, there is not sufficient justification for Maury to immediately reverse his stance, but we know that isn't true because somehow human Colonel Elliot Leland becomes the commander of the Earth Landing Brigade and not Metphius or Galugu. That's empty. Leland is a very different character than Commander Erwin Smith from Attack on Titan, but they share a voice actor, hair color, insubordination to the government, and willingness to put their own life on the line in these risky military maneuvers. So the inspiration is evident. Leland's selfishness is on display sooner as he claims that defeating Godzilla will appoint a new era for him as a pampered hero. A much more shallow and stock secret motivation than wanting proof that more is outside the walls in order to vindicate your father's secret theory that you feel a lot of guilt for outing to the government as a child. That contains some spoilers for Erwin, but I'm sorry, but we are already exposing both the official and hidden motivations for Leland in his first scene, a hallmark of great writing. Where Leland comes into his own as one of the most dynamic characters of the movie, though, is his past with Haruo. They are childhood friends. And since Haruo is the criminal on bail that they are technically listening to on this mission, Leland has to weigh the chain of command with listening to his friend. What is best for humanity with what's best for him. Childish things versus adult maturity. Anyway, I'm not sure if it's from lack of subtlety in the storytelling, inability to read finer emotions in the art style, or to further show Metphius' manipulation of Haruo's emotions, but Metphius feels the need to say outright that Haruo is still angry even though he's getting what he wanted. Haruo responds he is unsure if everything will go to plan, and Metphius repeats a line about Leland from trusting in a line from Leland about trusting in a hero, but Metphius says the hero he trusts in is Haruo. Now again, I mentioned how Eren was singularly confident in himself before he faced any real opposition from the Titans. Haruo said earlier that kindness and pride were dead, so this would almost further that, except his ego clearly informed his terrorism attempt, and his confidence in writing, updating regularly, and presenting his paper to the leaders of the ship. Heck, forget all that. Leland is Haruo's childhood friend and is as proud as ever. True, we are only seeing him now after they are within Earth's orbit, but he had to have this belief to choose to be commander of this mission. And if he was a child, same as Haruo, and entered the ship but became his superior, he needed the same motivation to achieve his rank. In any case, it is just strange that Metphius has to elicit in Haruo what his archetype already bore from the beginning. And Metphius is a AOT analog, an actual role in the story, is a foil to Haruo / Eren, but we'll get there. He's not in season 1 of AOT. When the party lands, they unload their mechs, traps, and command centers to begin their plan. I do not think it productive to give an exact play-by-play of the conversation between the characters, but Martin slots into the Zoe Hanji role from AOT, and Yuko Tani becomes Haruo's official handler 38 minutes into the film as the scout team goes out, at which point they realize how different the flora / fauna have become. Leaves are sharper than razors, and a masked humanoid watches the operation from the razor bushes. Yuko now explains her motivation. She joined this operation because Haruo would be there. She always wanted to meet him because her grandfather saved him, and she is curious if the Central Committee used the bombs to destroy the Taui shuttle, or if it was his bombs, or if it was something else. We'll find out later, but not with any characters who care at that moment. Haruo shuts this down, stating that he does not want to be so judgmental of humans, but this is against his own philosophy, expressed through the opening scene, and then the narration of the committee sacrificing them and kindness being dead, so whatever. Yuko's grandfather saved Haruo as a child and talked him down from his terrorism attempt, so maybe there's a double meaning to his kindness is dead remark. That he could rediscover kindness in Yuko, but that would be if the trilogy cared about Yuko outside of her obsession with Haruo, which is not likely, because Haruo then blames Godzilla for taking away justice, pride, and faith. He says that fighting Godzilla again can take back that dignity, but clearly they never lost pride. And they have a working justice system as he got court-martialed for terrorism. This primes us for a story where he realizes they still have humanity exemplified through Yuko, but she will entirely orbit his character and eventually get fridged to make room for other characters. Now, the three leads of Attack on Titan are Eren Yeager, Armin Arlert, and Mikasa Ackerman. Now, Mikasa is another childhood friend of Eren, who the Jaegers took in after human traffickers killed her parents, and the moment Eren saved her by killing one of the traffickers, and then he wrapped his scarf around her, that awoke something in her that indebted her to Eren. This also manifests as romantic feelings as the cast goes from 10 years old to mid-teens to young adult over the course of the show. Mikasa bears a strength that Eren never gets, and she has to save him as often as he saves her. Mikasa is the least developed of the three main characters, but she still grows a lot in her outlook, and she winds up being the deciding factor of many of the action scenes in the show, especially the final one. Eren, Mikasa, and Armin balance each other, like any good trio does. And this trilogy took out Armin completely and relegated Mikasa to a weak damsel that completely loses agency midway through the story. I feel the need to reiterate that Attack on Titan is not the only way to tell a story of this scale, but legitimately, as I think you will come to see, this trilogy is the kind of story where failing the Bechdel test legitimately does make it somewhat misogynistic. And Mikasa is an example of a well-written character that is still obsessed with the main hero, that they chose to deviate from because their inspiration was clearly AOT. The party stumbles upon the ruins of some buildings that have almost transformed into the earth. As Martin explains, lichen attached itself to the building's rubble and fossilized with further flora growing on top of that. Haruo loses his balance, a symptom of PCP addiction. Not kidding. He intentionally falls to his knees and declares, as the music swells, that although we've forgotten, this planet has always remembered us. And he says they must take it back. It's a very effective emotional moment, but we have to actually examine what the trilogy is saying, what actually happened here, because Haruo is wrong, and that's part of the point of this entire series. As we learn in scenes before and after this one, the flora fauna of the Earth changed while they were gone. Leaves are stronger than steel, and the native animals there are just as strong, but seem like offshoots of Godzilla. These Servum, as they are called, attack the base camp, and this batch is winged. There's also terrestrial ones. The metallic and magnetic properties of the Servum and the plants are in common with Godzilla, and the trilogy later confirms that it's not his doing, but natural mimicry across nature. So nature has absorbed the humans' buildings, yes, but did so to become Godzilla. There's an old poster that came out before we knew much about what the 2014 film would entail. It was, I believe, a Comic-Con exclusive, and it showed building rubble coalescing into an effigy of Godzilla. It equates Godzilla with destruction and dominion over what he has destroyed, a monster planet. Now you can see why I said that title made more sense. Growing over the remains of humanity is a win condition for Godzilla, not an inspiring moment for humanity. Haruo is, of course, allowed to be wrong. He'll be wrong a lot. It's just important to note that as often as it happens. Leland listens to Martin's explanation of the flora fauna and comes to the reasonable conclusion that they must retreat, saying it would be the height of stupidity to fight Godzilla for a planet like this. Haruo has an emotional attachment, obviously, to staying. But he gets so angry that he literally attacks his good friend Leland, pinning him up against the wall. Haruo confronts Leland on abandoning his goal of being humanity's hero by taking down Godzilla, and Leland, again, correctly explains that they have already taken heavy losses, their manpower is not trained in fighting, and he frankly underestimated the mission. Now, since Leland is now abdicating the title of hero of humanity, and Medphius applied it to Haruo's holy mission, we can fairly expect it to be Haruo that this journey immortalizes into some kind of legend, we'll get there, and not Leland. Now, notably, Medphius followed these two when they ran off, so he is able to manipulate Leland by saying he agrees with him, but the Servum damage their equipment, so they cannot leave. Medphius keeps going, explaining that the only path for retreat they even have is pretty much a verbatim the choreography of Haruo's attack plan. So they'll be going that way anyway, and then later, Medphius tells Haruo that he knows Godzilla will not let them escape and will seek them out, so we'll get the fight anyway. There's certainly things to appraise as well or poorly written in the trilogy so far, and that's not my focus here. So far, it's actually been pretty good. Functionally speaking, pretty good so far. Haruo is not going to have an arc until the next movie. The side characters are more of a Greek chorus than individuals, and the specific details built up in this movie are going to destroy some plot points of later films. But so far, nothing has contradicted itself, and that's how I define a good movie. And also, Leland's arc grounds this film pretty well. Still, now Godzilla shows up, and we have another point of comparison to AOT. So Eren Yeager winds up in military custody after his actions in the Battle of Trost. And after a trial, Captain Levi becomes Eren's official handler. Levi being humanity's strongest soldier, a very dynamic role that toes the line between mentor and main cast member. Levi's deal is that he's so strong and skilled that eventually he has to watch everyone around him die. His Levi squad consists of very skilled hand-picked soldiers, and on a mission outside of the walls, midway through Season 1, they are responsible for protecting Eren. Now at that point, an intelligent 15-meter Titan starts hunting, after Eren and Levi's squad races through a wooded area as this huge Titan follows them. Levi's squad begs Eren to trust them and not go off and fight the Titan by himself. Eventually, Levi's squad has to fight this Titan because the plan didn't entirely work, and Eren chooses to believe in them. Levi tells him that after all of these missions, he does not know which is the correct option, if he should trust in his comrades or in himself. Levi tells Eren to do as his conscience dictates. And then Eren watches this intelligent Titan systematically and brutally kill the other soldiers in Levi's squad, and then Eren fights the Titan himself. That scene is so crucial to the entire show and Eren's development, and Planet of the Monsters has seen so similar. I think the inspiration is clear. Just the reference is possible. You should know this movie came out 2017, and Season 1 of AOT dropped in 2013, with the manga coming out before that, so they had time to copy this part. When Godzilla appears, it is in a wooded area where he poses a big danger to their convoy. Even though by all accounts Yuko is Haru's official handler, Metphius has control over Haru's handcuffs and releases him. Very strange. Specifically, Metphius says the words, "Do as your soul is crying out to do," which is the epitome of copying someone's homework but changing the words enough to where it looks like you didn't. Haruo races off on a speeder to fight Godzilla by himself. In this case, he wants to record Godzilla's force field pattern, which is crucial to this annihilation strategy. But all of the speeder's attacks are too light, so he preps a kamikaze run. This is at the beginning of Haruo's journey, and it would be rather embarrassing if this exact visual becomes the wraparound to the end of his arc, but I digress. Delusions of grandeur, an inflated sense of strength, as well as violent suicidal actions are side effects of PCP use. Taking a scene that was so complex and driven by the strong personalities of a large cast and turning it into Haruo distracting Godzilla to selfishly advance his plan while killing himself is just such a weird thing to see as a consumer of both pieces of media. The only reason Haruo doesn't go through with it is because Leland commandeers some heavier artillery to get Godzilla's attention, and Godzilla returns fire, killing Leland. As I am rewatching and reviewing this, I'm realizing that this film is rather light on Leland, and this is not a case where he's a top 10 or top 20 character arc in the franchise, but I gravitated toward him because his is the only character arc in the film. He is a well-intentioned and level-headed character, and the conflict between his ideals and Haruo's is so interesting in a movie where the only other main character is Metphius, who just agrees with Haruo. I like Leland because he had a simple arc of choosing between his military role or his childhood friend. That is to say, choosing what is best for humanity, or his childish goal of being the ultimate hero. And it always felt to me watching this movie that there was a complexity to his choices, instead of just vague, confused writing that I see in the trilogy as a whole. He died to save another soldier, but that soldier was specifically Haruo, and in so doing he helped Haruo get the data he needed for the plan Leland at least professionally opposed, but Leland must have been on board initially to take the mission. So Metphius is the next person in command. Again, he's on the committee. It's kind of weird that he's not in control of the mission from the get-go, but he immediately defers leadership to Haruo, which confirms they'll do his plan. Despite there being an entire chain of command composed of a coalition of 3 humanoid species, Haruo's acceptance speech is enough to convince everybody there not to mutiny and instead follow him to their certain death fighting Godzilla. Again, AOT being a show is not really relevant at this point, but this specific plot point made a lot more sense when it was Cadet Eren Yeager who finished top 10 of his training year, inspiring other cadets, one of which was Armin, in the lead-up to the Battle of Trost. There is no reason that Adam Bindewald, Belubi, Galugu, and Martin should all listen to Haruo, and we cannot argue that the earlier scenes of Haruo not being confident in this mission means that he had an arc, because he was willing to ask the entire ship to implement this plan anonymously and then also present it to the Central Committee, and nothing changed in Haruo from the beginning, even though his friend died saving him from recklessly carrying out this plan. The Servum Swarm also poses a major roadblock in operational security that the film kind of acknowledges, but they'll disappear from any of these conflicts against Godzilla later on, so contrivance there, but we're not looking for contrivances right now, we're looking at PCP addiction. Godzilla's part of the battle is looking around and firing his beam. Throughout the entire trilogy, he'll be very sluggish and lethargic. Another symptom of PCP we haven't covered yet, and believe me, it is actually notable how lethargic this Godzilla is. During Leland's attack, Haruo's attacks were not hard enough to register on Godzilla's force field, yet after sustaining those, a volley of shots from Leland that did register on the force field, and shooting one atomic breath at him, Godzilla was spent and retreated instead of finishing off the people Manticus was so sure he would not let escape. It's not even a case like -1 where using the beam hurts him. He got so tired from doing nothing that he had to retreat. And Godzilla will spend most of film 2 and like half of film 3 sleeping, even though well, actually, he's spent most of this film sleeping. You'll find out how I can say that so confidently soon enough. After a battle where Godzilla can barely register how fast, comparatively, the machinery around him is moving, Godzilla explodes. Now, this still required Haruo risking his life, but it kind of screwed up the stakes because no one saved Haruo. He just managed to survive the gun shooting on his power suit like there's no tomorrow. Okay, so Godzilla just died, and we've got 14 more minutes and then 2 more movies. How, do you ask? Martin starts talking to Haruo because Martin is the exposition guy, as I'm sure you remember, about how biologically the Godzilla they just killed is unlikely to be the real capital G Godzilla because nature always changes, and that was identical. And yeah, that wasn't the Godzilla this trilogy bears in its title. That 50-meter creature was Godzilla Filius, and the original real Godzilla now wakes up, demolishing the mountain he was sleeping under because he is 300 meters tall and has a beard. These are both for Filius because they kept the plot twist intact for the marketing of the first movie. Even though they are publicly claiming that the largest Godzilla is only 50 meters. Well, whatever. This doesn't have the beard, but this is what I'm using to represent. Anyway. He issues a super oscillatory wave out of his mouth and creates a huge shockwave from whipping his tail that destroys the vehicle Haruo's in and maybe kills everyone else. It at least knocks Haruo out. That's the end of the movie. It's difficult to use the built-in stopping points of these films, for one thing because it is meant as one long big story, but also because the novel adaptations literally chop the second film in half to make the whole story just 2 books. All in all, this moment of false confidence from Haruo constitutes the first couple episodes of Aaron's battle in Trost, in terms of challenging his confidence, leading his comrades into battle. But whereas those episodes used that opportunity to flesh out Armin, Mikasa, and Jean Kerstein, Haruo gets rescued by one of the humanoids watching them earlier, a young girl with bug-like antennae, and we will focus again on his perspective as he finally starts having an arc in Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle. But right now, I'm going to call it Godzilla, Cigarettes on the Edge of Battle. Okay, so we are reaching the section of this essay where I have to go beyond the first film, and that means spoiling more parts of Attack on Titan. If you are so inclined to proceed, I would encourage you to watch this trilogy in AOT, and to find it whether in print or animation. The trilogy's on Netflix, and Hulu has Attack on Titan. Okay, so in Attack on Titan, something very interesting happens in the Battle of Trost. A spoiler for the first season, but integral to the marketing of the rest of the show. Eren somehow becomes a 16-meter tall, intelligent Titan. In order to destroy that which he hates, Eren literally becomes it. I'm going to try to be a lot lighter on the spoilers from here on out with AOT, because I want you all to watch it. But at the end of the season, Armin tells Eren that in order to defeat monsters, they have to let go of their humanity, that nothing worth losing, it's not worth holding on to if you can't lose it. That's built into the stakes of the show with Eren. The statement from Armin comes back in almost every major plot point in how they are letting go of their humanity piece by piece. And the question the City on the Edge of Battle asks, it tries to explore through its 100-minute runtime, is it worth it to defeat your enemy if the cost is your humanity? So, look forward to that. Okay, so you already know 2 of the titles by which to refer to this film. Let's add a third. The direct translation of the Japanese is Godzilla, Battle Mobile, Proliferation City. Okay, so the film opens with the Central Committee offering a bit of foreshadowing on the Erratrum, meant as an oh crap moment. They ascertain that anything on the scale of this 300-meter Godzilla Earth could destroy their mothership by shooting its beam to the sky at them. There will be no payoff for that in this film, and it won't even be Godzilla that destroys the ship, but the purpose of that scene is clear. Plot twist that jeopardizes the perceived safety of their enclosure that the characters are reacting to with reasonable fear. This is the damn it at Stohess district reveals there are titans inside of the walls moment. Sorry, big spoiler. But I want to take a brief moment to again talk about how the action-adventure show handles foreshadowing for plot twists as opposed to the melodramatic philosophy lecture. I told you Eren is a titan. Well, a couple episodes before that reveal, you see evidence of this. When he gets injured in training, his head steams to heal. Steam goes off his head to heal. A trait unique to Titans. It's a very subtle thing, but lays the groundwork for the first major plot twist of the show. To solve its mysteries, you take note of what cuisine and technology our heroes have, and what our villains have. Some plot points are as obvious as Metphius' machinations, but we see those characters acting in ways that they're revealed to contextualize this, not as this trilogy did, one of our first scenes of Metphius being him and the Bill Saludo member, both casually admitting to each other that they both try to take over the Earth and are manipulating things to go back there. Again, the point of this essay is not how AOT is the only way to tell this story. Different approaches work. NBC's Grimm has a surprising amount of plot points and arcs in common with AOT. But it plays those out in its own unique way. This trilogy just oozes of pretension when the runtime gives us more quiet moments to solve its mysteries. And they are easier to solve. Alright, I should clarify the point I made a few paragraphs ago about how the chain of command should have prevented Haro from taking control. Even though you can directly chart a chain linking Leland to Metphius to Haro. For one thing, Yuko is directly Haro's superior on the mission, and has to give him a parachute later, but she wasn't the one to free him. That was Metphius against the orders of Leland, who was still alive at that time. And then he's risking not only his company's materials and soldiers, but also other companies, and Belobeat, Galagu, and Martin have been able to move more freely on this mission than Haro, and have at least comparable power to Metphius when he was advising Leland earlier. Although they are friendly with Haro, as I pointed out, the film was more concerned with showing the technological means of transmission of his message, reaching all of them, and less so about his charisma to convince them. After his speech, I guess I have to take for granted that he can convince them to go along on the same mission that just killed Leland, but the film doesn't show us why they would go along with it. They just do, and for some reason don't take any of the available outs to discredit him that they have. The reason I bring this up is that, again, that scene in the Erratrum that opens this movie, even though their literal captain is giving them an order to stay in Earth's orbit under risk of Godzilla beam, they have different privileges, responsibilities, and expertise in their sectors, so they argue because it's a matter of operational security. Since it concerns probabilities of landing team survival, the ex-SIF delegate gets a say. Since it concerns physical vessels, the Bill Saludo have a say. And it's just really interesting that this conversation, the one that should have been happening about Haro's death march, is happening based on a hypothetical about Godzilla's beam being capable of reaching their altitude. Alright. The title card uses the imagery of replicating nanometal twisting to form the title, and the movie will utilize nanometal in a way that ties into my PCP analysis, so just keep that in mind. Haro wakes up, his malady is treated, and his skin covered in a fine powder. Now, this powder over his skin, some very sacred scales, is actually going to effectively grant him immunity from some of the other physical ailments that will lead to reduced respiration, reduced blood pressure, and coma in the other characters. And that is why I find it important to note here that it is an angelic dust granting Haro immunity. An immunity that will amount to invulnerability that empowers him to use violence and anger to single-handedly reverse the status quo at the end of the movie. The whole PCP aspect of this is technically begging the question in order to have a platform to talk about the storytelling of the trilogy, but you must admit this is the most apt comparison so far. It takes only like 10 minutes for Haro to reunite with the crew from the first film, and does so in a way that removes so much of the tension that could have been there. We see a Hotua girl tending to Haro's wounds, sorry, that's the bug people, and another one attacks Yuko, this one being identical. Attacks Yuko, Adam, Marco, and Belubi, that's the group there. But the film makes it pretty clear almost immediately that they are two separate twins. never allowing us, the audience, to worry about what she might do to Haruo if she's that hostile to the other humans. At the same time, after the Hotua people take our human survivors into custody, we almost immediately see that Martin is there, and he confirms that Metphius is not there, but says so in such a way that implies he's still alive. Belubi and Galugu reunite. Not only are we confirming so soon that every main character survived, but we were literally just biding time until the Billisuludo realized what the Hotua used for their arrowheads. It's a really rough part of the movie. I do not want to be impossible to please. Yuko is finally being treated as the main character, even a leader among her group at the beginning of the film, and this film will show us friction in this coalition as the Billisuludo have their own goals, independent of the humans. Haruo is allowed to show more than one emotion, and this is the beginning of an arc he will genuinely have, though it's against the way he's characterized before and after this. He genuinely believed that Godzilla robbed all the attributes that made them human, but when he defeats them again, he's fine. It doesn't really make sense that Haruo hasn't slipped even deeper into his depression and anger. I'm complaining again. This Haruo is a lot more pleasant to watch, even if it took literal angel dust to get there. Martin puts together the people with antennae living in tunnels in the ground, evolved from bugs, and the Billisuludo exposed their technology-based racism against the Hotua, all while the people still ultimately look to Haruo and accept it when he decides to go fight Godzilla again. Specifically, the old Haruo returns when he gets angry about the Billisuludo casually talking about slaughtering the Hotua, and a flashback to Metphius reminds Haruo he should be angry at Godzilla. A question I have to ask myself in this process is how often can I just keep pointing out the same narrative confusion, the same detachment and violent tendencies from characters, sometimes the exact same dialogue, as unique talking points for this PCP comparison? Well, the rage transfers from Haruo to Yuko for a good bit of this movie. Well, she gets jealous about the attention and care Haruo seems to have for the twin Hotua girls, Mina and Miyana, the angry one and kind one respectively. Martin's exposition teaches us that the Hotua communicates psychically when the twins channel Mothra's egg's power, and that the Hotua, though seemingly primitive, have a rich culture. He has even learned, somehow, that Godzilla Philius was a subspecies, and that the entire surface is mimicking Godzilla. Logic be damned, Martin will always be right, because he is a mechanism in the story. I find the approach taken with Hanji more suitable. Someone who obsessively spearheads the search for truth because of the odd kind of person they are, not for what the story can make them say. At some point, I need to mention that during the initial landing of this Earth Advance team, they had to bomb the area to land, and the Hotua understood this to be a terrorism attack on their home. Haruo earnestly explained otherwise, and I think that is the actual reason his character needed to be more even-tempered in these scenes. It's the prequel Anakin Skywalker effect. A smart and empathetic woman like Padme is not going to fall for the emotionally stunted, genocidal fascist Anakin Skywalker unless he's really, really nice to her. Even so, our heroes suffer no consequences, and neither Hotua nor human/Billisuludo blood is spilt. Obviously, the lesson here is to be more like the Hotua, but this is a very shallow exploration of these actions in such a talky show. You may not have seen AOT, but you've probably seen Kong Skull Island, which used the Vietnam War as the lens through which to analyze the journey to Skull Island, instead of imperialism. And the bombs that they drop at the beginning of the film are the first tangible effect of the violence that the film interrogates and punches as its theme. But I digress. Now, Marco does confront Haruo about wanting to fight Godzilla again. But that conflict is pushed aside to favor the aforementioned resentment of the twins from Yuko. And that leads to worm-type Servum using their tentacles to pull her legs apart and then trying to ambush her. Since the filmmakers refused to give Yuko characterization in the previous film and are now barring objectifying imagery and having her be preyed upon when Haruo was not, when he was in the area earlier, it puts a bad taste in my mouth. In fact, even this escapade, Yuko's biggest moment, so far only exists so that we can see Galugu realize that the Hotua's arrowheads are made of nanometal. And then Metphius does a Deus Ex Machina literally to save the characters from some flying-type Servum. Earlier, we saw Haruo question himself again and cry out for Metphius, which shows the hold this Exif has over him. I cannot complain too much about this, actually. I think the very simple and subtle way of showing that Haruo's sense of self-worth and justice ties back to Metphius does the legwork of the foreshadowing here. As you will find out whenever I get to reviewing Gamma Rebirth, I really appreciate foreshadowing that subtly reveals character dynamics through their relationships to each other and what they say in crucial moments. I guess that means Seshita does too. As you'll see though, liking Metphius and Haro a lot more in this movie is not going to affect my overall assessment of the film's conflict and themes. The argument aboard the Eratrum between the committee members representing the Billis Ludo and Exif sets the tone for the rest of the film. The Billis Ludo look to technology, and the Exif use their mysterious god to make decisions. When Metphius tells Haro of the committee's plan to lead the solar system, Belubi and Galagu come up next to them, and Haro is framed between the two delegations in the shot competition. Anyway, after the Billis Ludo tell Haro they can win using the nanometal, he addresses the survivors of their mission. Once again, Marco speaks out of turn, and Haro invites Belubi and Galagu to explain the nanometal. Haro's moment of asking the remaining men if they want to stay, but not blaming them if they do not, is something Erwin did in Attack on Titan. But Haro steeps it in his thoughts of living on the ship, which can best be described by how Eren regarded living in the walls, as living like cattle. Now, are we meant to assume that seeing Leland's sacrifice and being influenced by Belubi as well as Metphius has led Haro to mature? Or should we assume that this dialogue and plot point was the starting point and that Haro was the easiest for the narrative to say these words? I am clearly arguing for the latter perspective, but if you believe the former, we can have that debate at a later time. The scene of the surviving cadets choosing to join Erwin's scout regiment was a very emotionally impactful scene because while we always knew our main trio was going to stay, the characterization of Jean throughout the last dozen episodes leads to a very difficult decision to stay and fight and avenge the people he's lost. There's not really a moment like that here. Haro was always going to stay and fight. Yuko was always going to stay with Haro. Metphius needs to manipulate Haro, and with the Billis Ludo spearheading this part of the mission. Martin was always going to keep studying the Earth's curiosities, and Marco was always going to leave because the story was less interested in exploring dissidents in Haro's leadership outside of bastardizing the Billis Ludo in this film and the Exif in the next. Martin, as the primary tool for exposition, explains monster factors in changing the flora fauna, and the Earth seemingly has restructured to serve Godzilla's needs, as if it chose him. Haro already viewed this mission as taking the Earth back from Godzilla, and this justifies his perspective on that, inflating the self-importance of him on this mission. He defensively declares that they will have to take the Earth back. This also plants the seed for Haro that humans should liberate the Earth from this state and not that kind of control, and not accept that kind of control over Earth coming from anyone other than them. You should keep this in mind when the characters then stumble upon a city made entirely from the nanometal in Mechagodzilla's carcass that spreads and consumes a few servum. The Hotua twins warn Haro that Mechagodzilla City is poisoned, but since they use nanometal in their tools and technology, we can understand this to be a warning of the same caliber as, hey, you'd better be careful if you walk into that oil refinery there. Just make sure to be safe around the product. You know, it's not really this is the sinister Satan of this planet. It's just be careful. It's dangerous. Anyway, the nanometal's AI explicitly serves the directive of fighting Godzilla, and the nanometal has reproduced Mechagodzilla's production plant at an even larger scale. And a giant Mechagodzilla is on the poster, lording over even Godzilla. So you would be forgiven for thinking that the nanometal will form a giant Mechagodzilla. The characters just hand-wave that away immediately. They end up augmenting power suits into flying vulture mechs. For what is it worth, Metphius is the final person to speak against rebuilding Mechagodzilla, but Galagu this whole time was talking about other better projects. The city itself becomes the very specific terrain needed for Haro's Godzilla defeat strategy. And though I think the film is only kind of aware of it, there's a really clear parallel between Haro and the nanometal AI. Both operate mainly under the goal of defeating Godzilla no matter the cost, and both push aside ideas like Mechagodzilla to favor one single ideal strategy. Consequently, unless we are drawing these similarities to their logical conclusion, the Billis Ludo created AI should have made another Mechagodzilla. That would have made more sense. The idea is supposed to be that if the Billis Ludo will try to tempt Haro into merging with the nanometal and becoming a monster by showing that the nanometal will be the only way to defeat Godzilla, and the only conscious agent that cares as much about doing that as Haro does, but he's already in a synergy with the nanometal that Galagu, passionate creator of Mechagodzilla, isn't. Sorry, that's a very wordy, long sentence, all that to say. Haro's goals align perfectly with the nanometal. perfectly. The Bills Ludos don't. And we're not interrogating that. Haru's going to be horrified about merging with the nanometal and basically never even consider it, even though he still does have to agonize over the decision in the moment. But it's because the gun is to his head from the Bills Ludo, not because he actually is the nanometal, but incarnate. I mean, it's hard to explain. As the movie develops, more and more Bills Ludo allow themselves to join with the nanometal in a symbiosis. And this shapes the vague destroy Godzilla directive into a more well-defined misanthropic worldview of submission through this AI hive mind. If you are familiar with Attack on Titan, you might know what comparison this naturally brings. And it's a pretty spoilery one, so I'll put it in simple terms. Of the intelligent Titans, one is near omnipotent. However, it comes with a certain mindset, almost a hive mind of all of the holders of this power. A vow to renounce war. So you have this never-ending power, but you can't use it unless you can bypass that. The arc in question is also the one that broke down Aaron's philosophy, making him question if his mission truly was the best one. And so for that to happen to Haru now, and the nanometal's on his same page, makes more sense if they started with AOT and then extrapolated outward than if they started with this story of Haru and the nanometal and then filled that in. Metphius asks the Bills Ludo for just one thing, to give him some tech to repair his religious artifact that he'll do some things with next film. And Yuko practices flying in a vulture. The former will diverge from the Bills Ludo's intentions, and the latter will actually embrace them. But maybe not as far as the movie should have pushed it. First, however, Yuko reassures Haru after he voices his insecurities, though doesn't exactly calm him. Right after the first film alludes to it, Martin explains that the Hotua's treatment and scales has made those treated with it functionally allergic to Mechagodzilla City. And so Haru, who's suffering those symptoms, leaves the city briefly to ask advice from Metphius. Metphius spoon-feeds Haru the author's assessment of nanometal as monstrous and parasitic, and then whispers the name Ghidorah into Haru's ear as the name of the Exif World's monster that destroyed their home. Now, when this scene was in the trailers, because of the art style and the way the camera pulls back, a lot of people thought Metphius was kissing Haru. In the very next scene, Yuko kisses Haru after his ego is sufficiently inflated to declare that they need to defeat Godzilla, will defeat Godzilla, and that he will show Yuko what being on Earth was like. So naturally, that impresses her. Checking back in on the PCP symptoms, yeah, that is the sense of invulnerability, but also the allergy to the nanometal could be interpreted as nausea and dizziness depending on how you view Haru clutching this area. Was it more the chest or more the stomach? Art style is kind of weird. This is only the second Godzilla film of the 70-year history to include two main characters kissing, and the first kiss was in Invasion of Astro Monster. It'd be really funny if the next film jumped to a different milestone and featured the first sex scene in the franchise, but with just one of these two characters and not both. But there's no way that can happen, right? Anyway, Godzilla wakes up an hour into this movie, and when he finally starts moving, a single step takes over 7 seconds. That might contextualize what I mean about lethargy being a major motif, because you cannot watch the movie and think, hey, Godzilla's really spry and agile. That's just impossible. Anyway, Adam informs Haru that the city is eating some Billisaludians, and all of the humans in the room instantly think this is too far, even though it's a volunteer thing. I'm not offending, I'm just saying that there's more of a debate to be had here than just this one conversation and the climax. Yuko, who overhears part of this, wanders in and defends the practice, having Haru and Martin, the POV character and exposition machine, respectively, having them both oppose, it kind of poisons the well and takes out the suspense. Haru's not even considering joining the nanometal now, even though it flows so easily from his wants. And the way you write a suspenseful climactic decision is to make either choice seem possible based on cause and effect. Think Luke's temptation to the dark side in Star Wars Episode 6. The suspense is there because of his struggle, and the fact that his dark clothing and force choke usage suggests to us a level of compromise between light and dark. In that battle, there's moments where Luke is using the force for good, but also where he's dipping into the dark side, and you can buy where it's going to go, but you hope it resolves positively. Anyway, the only reason Haru gets in the third vulture for this final campaign is to resolve morale after the argument. It's really taking the teeth out of the film's central question to have the answer so clear, not only to the audience, but also the major characters, aside from Yuko, who, spoilers, will choose to regret her opinion. The battle reenacts the last film's climax, but this time Godzilla Earth can weather the attack. Godzilla Earth is the name of this particular incarnation, and he's a lot stronger than his offshoot. So it manifests as Godzilla attaining a scarlet mode that is somewhat references Burning Godzilla from the 90s films. And Martin explains this as everything else in the series. At least this time it makes sense to explain to people why they must evacuate, unlike his rants earlier and later. Martin will be especially incomprehensible in the third film, but he leads the remaining humans away while the Villisludo merge with the nanometal, and Galagu holds out hope that Haro will join them in this. Scarlet Godzilla is too hot for the Vulture pilots to approach, and since only the human inside is susceptible to heat, Galagu starts to fuse the pilots to the nanometal with force. Being rubbed to the scales earlier allows Haro to resist, but Yuko loses control of her craft until Haro can save her. Still, this is where Haro realizes that it's not worth it to become a monster just to defeat one. His options are fusing with the nanometal to be able to do a kamikaze run into Godzilla and destroy him, or follow Metphius' advice to destroy Galagu and the city control center. Though I have voiced major criticism with the arc, this is his arc in the movie, and it should make the next movie's conflict impossible based on how Haro chooses his humanity over killing Godzilla, but we'll get there. He does agonize over it in the moment, so whatever. Changes in body awareness is one of the weird psychoactive properties of PCP use that's hard to fit into any reading of media, except insofar as merging with a nanometal changes the boundaries of your body and your surroundings and your mind. That's really all that we can use to describe what's happening there on the experience level. It's pain, and then you're part of a larger system and a base of knowledge, and you're not really you. You're part of a machine now. I don't know. Oh, and Yuko winds up in a nanometal-induced coma, another side effect of PCP that we've not gotten to yet. This movie gives us a bingo! The morality has also shifted in a notable way. For probably the first time in the series, we are meant to view Godzilla destroying a city as the lesser of two evils. Well, he was explicitly evil in the first film. He's a more amoral figure in the latter two. That's why it's so interesting to compare it to Attack on Titan. Armin, the wisest of the main trio, tells Eren they have to let go of their humanity to defeat the Titans, and boy, does Eren listen. But the point here is that there's likely a point where you will stop agreeing with Eren. According to this film, and most that try to tackle the problem of losing humanity to defeat an inhuman threat, that point is at the adoption of the belief, not its fruits. But it doesn't have to be that way. In the kaiju genre as a whole, the audience has a certain level of attachment that allows them to condone certain operations and root for monsters even as they're destroying so many people and so much infrastructure. It's not just that it's an underdog military going against an inhuman threat that you can also root for those military officers. That certainly helps, but the audience can also quickly accept and move on from a plot point wherein the government severely raises taxes to build an anti-Godzilla mech that promptly gets destroyed. In the real world, there'd be outrage for that, but you can get past that immediately in the kaiju story. One question AOT asks you is how much will you reconsider the blank check that you grant the heroes striking back at their Titan oppressors when there's civilian cost, or when they are using those same tactics against humans eventually. Unlike this trilogy where you're watching a rudimentary morality play, your introspection is part of the conversation with an Attack on Titan and the kaiju genre as a whole. Well, there is no use in prolonging the inevitable. Why I feel the way I do about this trilogy will become clear with the final installment, what all this was building to. Officially known as Godzilla the Planet Eater, for this exercise, let's call it Godzilla the Pill Eater, because it's one of the ways that you can. The film opens with Metphius confessing to the audience that the XF have been watching humans before Godzilla even appeared, far before, in fact, before the dawn of civilization. His conclusion is that religion does not actually work to keep humans in check, but they seek a leader that can carry out God's message and embody the culture of the era. This reframes the trilogy's events thus far because it explains why Metphius likes Haro so much and helped him so much. It explains the emphasis on the idea of a hero that Leland introduced, but Metphius ran with. I'll just put a pin in this, though. There's a lot more to say once Haro finds out. So Godzilla is sleeping once more, after spending so much energy in the last battle. It is 4 minutes into the movie. Let's play a game and see how long it takes him to wake up this time. As Martin watches the sleeping Godzilla, he speculates that instead of humans mistakes birthing Godzilla, maybe humans were the opening act for Godzilla, as the ultimate life form. As Martin is pretty much always right, we must accept this going forward. The idea kind of makes sense. That is what certain contingents of people believe about dinosaurs and humans. If we examine this in the context of the larger mythology of the trilogy, I wonder why the Hotua exist then. That's a case of nature recreating humans, but faster, stronger, smarter, and more physically aware. An adaptation that came after Godzilla and can live in symbiosis with them. Ergo, that's the more favored thing. If we're adopting this importance of the order of evolution, then you must admit that something like the divergence between chimpanzees and bonobos is more important than that between chimpanzees and humans because it happened later, and thus the Earth would have chosen that after choosing. It's nonsense, but the trilogy's running with it because Martin is always right. Remember. Because of the events of the previous film, there's a lot of fallout to explore. The Billis Ludo and the Eratrum see Haruo's actions as treasonous. Well, the humans and Exif agree with the filmmakers about the nanometal. Yuko is in a permanent coma, kept alive by the nanometal, and Adam has seemingly joined Metphius' religion off-screen due to the latter's role in their survival. In fact, Metphius has leveraged Haruo's miraculous nanometal resistance as proof he is a hero, and as Metphius said it would, that got everybody in line. In other words, Adam underwent a 100-degree character shift, not achieved through showing his transformation, but within 5-second foreshadowing via narration at the start of the film. The difficulty with comparing 3 movies to a 4-season show is that the show always has more time to develop themes and characters, except for Pastor Nick, a side character who is mostly in the shortest season of the show, whose devotion to his religion gets so much complexity for a bit part, so little screen time, so complex. It makes him obstinate, but also brave, a roadblock for the heroes, but also helpful in a moment, crucial in fact. AOT also has a lot to say against religion, but it does so a lot more fairly. Adam only had to diss religion before now. That's all he talked about. But now he is the most slavishly devoted member of Metphius' cult, and believes Haruo is the prophet of God or something. Yeah, okay. Anyway, Haruo is in anguish over Yuko's functional death, something he probably should have been when he thought everybody died from the Godzilla attack, but at least better late than never. But Adam's ramblings snap him back to his default anger, this time against something Metphius created. Keep this in mind, it'll be a surprise tool that can help us later. That scowl persists as he watches Metphius' religious ceremony, and Martin takes Haruo's side to explain the miracle as being the Hotua's angelic scales I've already mentioned. What makes Haruo this hero, and this miraculous hero at that, is because he resisted the nanometal. But so did most people there. Metphius calls the religion a cult, and Haruo gets angry, but it's difficult to tell at what. He asks Metphius if they can talk, and passes along Martin's diagnosis. Metphius explains that he is manipulating the survivors to ready them for another attack against Godzilla, using his god. And for some reason, he's a lot less sly saying this than he usually is, prompting Haruo to scream, asking why their god couldn't have helped sooner, why people had to die. And now it is clear that this is about more than just these characters. This is a rant against organized religion, given 3 yellow heads and beam attacks. Okay, I do not want a Planet 9 Crunch essay to be for or against religion. The cults we are interested in here pertain to entertainment culture. I cannot deny that many of the worst movements and organizations in history have had religion on their lips as they operated. Nor can I deny that the relevant god or gods have not stepped in at those times. But I also literally can't deny that belief in a god is a major part of a 12-step program, because I chose psychoactive drugs as my lens for this article. And I also think back to Grimm Season 5, Episode 16, where Avessen used his unique ability to give absolution to followers in his religion, convincing them that he was literally taking their sins within himself and healing them. Though the episode interrogated his monetary incentive, the way it resolved showed that without a doubt he genuinely, truly cared about the people. And that's what his core was in doing it. These questions of religion have inspired and motivated so much art, and they are natural ones to ask. I just do not think it's the best practice to relegate the religious characters to mindless background drones against their prior characterization in the last film of the trilogy, because it makes it so incredibly obvious that Haruo will not choose them. It's the nanometal problem all over again, but worse. He has to there has to be a choice that makes sense here, not just you ranting about different parts of your culture through a Godzilla lens. Anyway, I don't want to prescribe a specific path and say the story must take it, but if you are interrogating religion, do it sooner and do it deeper. Up until this point, characters like Adam only existed to take potshots at Metphius' religion. The commentary becomes so much more potent if he were converted sooner and his radicalization unfolded before our eyes. Metphius answers that he needed Haruo to become so angry that his hatred for Godzilla would overcome his disbelief in their god. That only Haruo was angry enough and proud enough and sure enough in what humanity could do. That is apparently why Metphius selected Haruo. But wait, I thought, based on the previous scenes I pointed to, that Metphius molded Haruo this way, that Haruo was always intended to be the hero, and that's how this wannabe terrorist made captain. No. At some unspecified point, Metphius noticed the anger and pride, a trait Haruo thought no one had, which should logically include himself, and then took an interest in him and started manipulating him. Haruo actually is special. His anger actually is something. His delusions aren't delusions. They're supported by the story. It's scarier if he was warped by Metphius, and that's also a way that you can weave in the religious commentary into your entire story. Maybe that makes Haruo religious and a fanatic, but like that does kind of fit with his slavish devotion to the thing and how he doesn't even consider the nanometal collective. I don't know. Okay, the bill is Luda turned off the Euratom's power, demanding Haruo's sentencing. In a moment that has been memed to death, Martin walks in a room to tell Haruo about it. Forgets what he was there to say, goes on a big rant about religion, and then remembers what he's there to say. Martin pitches that Haruo play a Trotsky and run away, and since Martin and Miana, who is in on the plan, are literally the only people he can trust right now, he has to go along with it. Conversing with Miana, Haruo learns that the Hotua philosophy is different from Metphius. They define winning as surviving and connecting life, with losing as dying. She then undresses and offers to connect life with Haruo, such a big step from the relatively chaste kiss last film. I'm more concerned, though, about the fact that Haruo is so important that one of, well, no, actually both, as we'll find out, of the powerful priestesses in the Hotua culture instantly want to sleep with him. Miana claims that it's to get to know him better, but both twins winced when he kissed Yuko last film. They witnessed that. This is a weird power fantasy. I don't know how old they are. They don't look as old as he does. They're very small compared to him, and they are bug people, and they're into him, and he's going to sleep with the second one. I don't know, man. I don't like it. Now that Metphius' influence on Haruo is temporarily severed, I can diagnose this as the plot writing, that Haruo's delusions, as we discussed, are real. And it's not Metphius making Haruo feel this way. Again, if you just have Metphius manipulating Haruo into feeling this way and becoming this, that makes it the clever deconstruction, but now it's just immature and someone on drugs, maybe. Anyway, thankfully, Haruo declines her offer for now. I've also seen memes taking the piss out of the situation. There's a picture of one of the Hotua with the caption, "Let me smash." It's a pretty funny meme. I recommend the memes for this movie a lot. It's not, this has no value as an appeal about film quality, but I think it's very telling that the only way a large amount of the audience knew how to interact with this movie is through relentless memes. During Haruo's sleep, one of the twins stumbles upon Metphius and confronts him for keeping secret that he too communicates psychically while the other one attempts to remove his spacesuit and sleep with him. Remove Haruo's spacesuit and sleep with him. I'm still not sure on the logic that because Miana took off a spacesuit before and Miana struggled to a little bit ago, that means the currently struggling Miana is actually Mina. In any case, Haruo sleeps with her. We don't see the action, but we do see the side of her naked body as she embraces him, and I don't mean to pro-clutch, but you gotta remember, City on the Edge of Battle was the second Godzilla film where main characters kissed, and now one of those characters is sleeping with someone else. It's weird for the franchise. They're also bug people. Anyway, both twin subplots demonstrate some aspect of attachment as a motif. Haruo is so detached from who he's sleeping with that he can barely tell her apart from her sister, and Metphius detaches himself from psychic communication with the Hotua while monologuing about how detached he is from frank, human, open expression, that he just observes them for the most part. Metphius restrains Miana and threatens to sacrifice her to Ghidorah, just as Godzilla opens his eye at the 32-minute mark. That would actually be a pretty good pace for a standard G movie. If the film didn't show Godzilla waking up again at 43 minutes in, which is literally halfway if you adjust for closing credits, so he's back asleep now. At the same time, Haro walks into Metphius preparing a soup for a ritual. After trying it, Metphius rambles on about how the angry observer Haro is the only thing that makes Godzilla a kaiju and not a giant creature. Haro peeks in the pot and finds Miyana's dead body. This is the most memed moment of the entire film. One really good one has Metphius' head on Gordon Ramsay's body, saying, "Finally some good effing food." It's so funny. Okay, it was a dream. Haro's nowhere near Metphius in real life. It's memory manipulation from Metphius, and Mina wakes up in terror because she heard her sister say the word Ghidorah. So Miyana is alive and just repeating the word Ghidorah for some reason as she's prepped a sacrifice for him. The soup is real, though, even if Miyano is not its main ingredient, and it basically becomes the Kool-Aid for Metphius' cult. I think it directs Ghidorah's shadow of who to consume. Because as Metphius tells his followers to embrace God by losing their individuality, the similarity to Nanometa debacle is probably intentional, but that was still very recent. It's not really logical that it's working. Like, I get what Gen Urobuchi is trying to say here about religion making people act against their own self-interest, but this was like between hours and a week ago that Bill Soto were demonized for trying this. Anyway, as I said, Ghidorah's shadow emanates from artifacts Metphius and another Exif hold, and it massacres the believers. This feels like an allusion to Heaven's Gate, especially with the alien and liquid components to it, and I think the film should be a little bit more tactful if this is the form of religious commentary it wants to provide. But I have my opinions, which may become reality, and I have Godzilla the Pill Eater, which is reality. A singularity opens up, and one of Ghidorah's impossibly long necks comes out to destroy the Eratrum. This version of Ghidorah can warp space and time, and its ties to the Gematron crystal override the ship's features. Consequently, their vital signs read as dead before they actually experience that happening. This causes Ghidorah to draw closer, nearer to Earth. Nearer Metphius' God to thee, one could say. With three singularities nearby for each of the heads. Haro and Godzilla both race into action. Haro to save Miyana from Metphius, and Godzilla to face the singularities and what comes out of there. I'll spare you any reproduction of Martin's play-by-play of the final act of the film. If I were to include it, this essay would double in length. He has words for everything, and the words pretty much... Why did that happen again? The words are pretty much just, this is impossible, but it's happening. Sorry. Basically, Ghidorah is not fully real in the world, so it can attack Godzilla, but he cannot touch it. We are deep into the PCP use now. Reality is bending on itself, and nothing makes sense. Metphius starts monologuing about the flowers of nature and how the prime monster is always the last and greatest flower. And then Ghidorah, the golden demise, devours those fruits. Deep philosophical thing. There's something Nietzsche in there, I'm sure. As far as Metphius has told Haro, Ghidorah destroyed the Exif's planet, but now he explains that some priests were spared to spread Ghidorah across the universe. This gets Haro angry and is coding religion as seeking destruction. Metphius has put an artifact in his eye that hypnotizes Haro, transferring these two into his memories. And this is another area where the awareness of one's body and mind, where it starts, how ideology is inseparable from the human and their tools and their purpose, the grand purpose and vulnerable avatars of the fight between Godzilla and Ghidorah. All that stuff comes into play. And this is also where we gotta give the Planet Eater its flowers. The next few minutes of the movie is where it beat Attack on Titan to the punch on one of its most beloved plot points. So, the trilogy first went into production, they tapped in Gen Urobuchi in 2015, and this film was released at the tail end of 2018. The part of Attack on Titan's manga where blonde manipulator War Chief Zeke takes Eren through the latter's memories in order to convince him of his nihilistic worldview started to debut in the middle of 2019. The anime trilogy somehow predicted perfectly that the older blonde character would go into the angry one's memories and try and convince him of his worldview. It was not without his fair share of foreshadowing in AOT. Memories were very important to the way Eren and his Titan functioned, and Zeke clearly needed Eren for something, but it's uncanny. And I say that I saw this before AOT, so these scenes impressed me on a first viewing, even though I still didn't think the reveals were the smoothest. Haro resists Metphius' sermon on the finite nature of the universe with great pain, even though he never once talked about immortality and never once really wanted it. He's been suicidal the whole time. Then we flash back to Haro's memory of his parents' death, but now it is Metphius that saves him, not Yuka's grandfather. Daichi, Tani, that's his name, I didn't mention it before. Metphius hands Haro his first ration aboard the ship. In the real world, Metphius cradles Haruo's body, reenacting La Pieta, while trying to convince Haruo that all these memories lead to the single truth that Haruo has just wanted the pain to end. A very suicidal mindset. So let's go back to the chart. Metphius made Haruo dizzy, which led to loss of balance, at which point he could give him hallucinations of falling into his memories in a state that could be a seizure since Metphius stabilizes him, all with the goal of implanting delusions and suicidal thoughts, so that Haruo will take to the violent behavior of ending the planet. This was the motherlode of PCP symptoms. Everything built into this, and I gotta say, I'm enjoying myself on this project. More than just memories, Metphius also conjures apparitions of Leland and Yuko, and visions of atomic bomb testing, which I guess he ties to the creation of the monsters, even though the 1940s is further away from the 1990s than the 1960s were. The 1960s being, of course, when PCP stopped being used in hospitals as medical. Metphius refers to himself as a primate, which I find kind of weird because there's a different Earth, a different planet, as the Exif homeworld, and evolution's the same there, even though his god is Ghidorah, who literally does have godlike characteristics. I don't know, man. Metphius' manipulation starts to take, despite this gaffe, until Mina and Martin pray to the god egg Mothra to invade the dream before it was established that both twins were necessary to amplify the psychic strength enough to reach a large room full of people. But now Martin can sub in for Miana to overpower Metphius from an entire mountain's height away. It's fine, don't worry about it. Metphius reveals that he is responsible for blowing up the Taui ship, and this does not immediately enrage Haruo because Metphius has broken him down so much. Haruo picks up the pendant he lost when his parents died in a flashback to something we've never seen before, restores his autonomy, the symbolism behind a flower. It's the flowers of spring, that Haruo's name, I guess, means that. And that would have been good information to learn from Metphius or Yuko or Leland before now, but nope. We're just dropping this in right now, right when it can help Haruo. He starts getting angry at Metphius, and that turns the title battle, shattering the artifact in Metphius' eye and pretty much killing him. We don't see him fully attack Metphius, but that action kills him, so I'm assuming there is more of a struggle there that we just didn't see. Confusingly, this allows Ghidorah to become corporeal, which is only supposed to happen under the condition of Haruo becoming the anchor to Ghidorah. But whatever, Godzilla immediately beats Ghidorah, and each head vanishes after one strike each. To pay off the foreshadowing from the start of the city on the edge of battle, Ghidorah's singularity destroys the Eratrum, and Godzilla destroys the singularity with an atomic breath from the Earth's surface. As Metphius dies, he tells Haruo that his anger can still manifest Ghidorah if he chooses to, and Haruo embraces the corpse. This is meant to mirror the last shot of City on the edge of battle. Haruo just angry enough to kill this guy. But also, Metphius was one of his only friends for years and kind of groomed him into this whole mindset, even though, I don't know, man. It's implying that Haruo's always like this, and I don't like that. With all the bad guys, except for Godzilla defeated, Haruo, Martin, and the other survivors assimilate to Hotua culture, and a montage in a different art style shows them bearing their weapons and rearing children. Eventually, the humans even adopt the Hotua style of clothing, except for Haruo, though he is otherwise clearly happy. You could use this to claim that Haruo is still not happy, but that would be forgetting that a major detail of Eren Yeager's clothing style was that he never took off the Shiganshina-style shirt, even after fleeing from there, while everyone else took fully to the scout uniform. So no, this is a reference to Attack on Titan and Eren Yeager. He takes great joy in seeing spring flowers, the symbol for his humanity that we were introduced to at most 20 strip pages ago. And it is Martin finally salvaging a vulture that gets Haruo to remember his crippling anger against Godzilla and Metphius' machinations. Gotta make sure this one comes out as optimal as possible. Okay. So, to prevent Martin from using the nanometal to restart the process of creating monsters, he makes sure Godzilla will destroy the vulture in Yuko's body, so there's no nanometal. And to prevent himself from summoning Ghidorah, an act coded as suicide, Haruo puts himself in that vulture, fulfilling the kamikaze charge he attempted twice before. In other words, to prevent his own suicide, he caused it. Technically, he had no way of knowing that it wouldn't summon Ghidorah to do that. But more to the point, this time he's leaving behind a family and culture that depends on him. The conceit is that he asks Miana if she hates Godzilla, and he starts to feel that only he feels hate and must die. If he remembered City on the Edge of Battle's climax, he would know he's capable of not letting his hate consume him. If he remembered earlier in this very film, he would know he's capable of not letting his hate drag Ghidorah into the world and consume everything. And the Hotua will reward this mistake by making Haro into a god in their culture. So no, this is a terrible ending, but let's wrap around these concepts, these topics. So Martin restarting industrialization with the nanometal being destructive per Medphyse's diatribe about all civilization technology leading to monsters. Okay. You must consider that if acts of pollution and war truly are the reason these monsters showed up, it does not make sense that they started appearing in the late 1990s. But whatever, it's not like the Exif mentioned timing as being important for their plans and for the monsters showing up. And it's not at all like this is an ironic statement. If the late-stage civilization of humanity and their polluting technology were bad and created these monsters, then the humans should not be able to live happily ever after, joining the Hotua with their highly advanced civilization and language capabilities, and their technology that includes the nanometal that was literally poisoning the land. Well, okay. You might say, but the Earth made them resistant to nanometal through their scales. Yeah, well, they still chose to use it. Remember that Hedera, the ultimate environmental evil, was reimagined as a successful biological weapon harnessed by the humans as one of their last acts of biological terror against the Earth, and its features in this very trilogy. It was in the opening recap, one of the newspapers that flashed by was that Operation Hedera. Expanded upon the novel, the prequel novels, but important even in the thing. If I look back from Hotua to Martin to Hotua to Martin, I do not see a difference at all, as all he wants to do is use the nanometal as technology. Also, Miana may claim that the Hotua do not experience hate, but that doesn't make it true. Anger and pride are what makes someone human according to the trilogy. So Haro feeling bad about himself because he's human doesn't make sense. But also the Hotua can conceptualize enemies, fierce enemies that take each other's lives in combat, such as what happened between Godzilla and their god Mothra. So the movie can piss off with that. It didn't think it through. Okay. Furthermore, one of the evilest machinations Medphyse did was use Haro's leadership as a religious messianic symbol. How are we meant to regard the Hotua making Haro a god of wrath to commemorate him? The film does not explore this because it cannot, but the myth of Haro, as well as his likely inheritable mental health issues, could lead to a manipulative, charismatic leader that once again mobilizes support for going to war against Godzilla. But the point's getting away from me. And I will say that the god of wrath that Haro becomes, they do pray for him to take away their worst thoughts. So maybe it's the absolution part of religion that I talked about earlier, but again, the film doesn't give us anything with that outside of just the briefest of scenes. Most importantly, Haro killing himself comes literally out of nowhere in the film, and we are literally in his head to see his turmoil. The final stretch of Attack on Titan takes us out of Aaron's head to keep us in suspense about his self-destruction. The Hotua subsequently immortalized Haro as a god of wrath with no runtime left to explore what that means. Well, Aaron literally becomes a god of wrath, and his story fully explores what that insinuates on a scale of understanding time, of the great power that he has, but also his motivations to use it in certain ways. Those certainly are two approaches to a similar story, and I think one was better, and the other is on some kind of depressant drug. Yeah, okay, conclusion time. Phew, this has been a long video essay, so I'll try and keep this conclusion quick. The trilogy is bad. I think Attack on Titan is good, but I've not substantiated that. And I have drawn comparison between this trilogy storytelling and hard drug use. Attack on Titan is not the kind of story to show the obvious temptation Haro is going through and use every aspect of the story to try and get it through his thick head that he shouldn't fall for it 3 times in a row. If this were Attack on Titan, and again I mean if the crew had the benefit of knowing how AOT ends and working backward to see how the Eren archetype inevitably leads there, if that were the case, then how this trilogy would end is Haro would use being the avatar of Ghidorah to overpower the nanometal hive mind in order to become the giant Mecha King Ghidorah monstrosity to fight Godzilla and the Servum and the Mothras and the Hotua. And then, instead of signposting it every way possible that it's wrong, the arc would ask you if it's wrong and where he went too far and if there's ever any hope of a different outcome. And that's the heart of my critique here. The arc Haro has in City on the Edge of Battle about choosing to save his humanity, even if it means not killing Godzilla, should logically prevent him from needing to learn that again in the next film. And seeing that he was able to overcome both of those and start to be happy with the Hotua means he did not need to kill himself at the end. But this examination of human nature is just his violent and detached suicidal dissociation that substantially got less fun to talk about once he went through with it. It's not even paired with action in a way exemplified by AOT, where you can match the rising personal stakes with the existential ones. This story is slow, more introspective than it can afford to be, with those moral training wheels rigidly rejecting the nanometal, or exit religion without even placing them as options to rush us into assimilating with the Hotula. Well, not exploring what that means. Captain Levi's speech about not being able to be sure what the right answer is between trusting your team or trusting yourself is a more human, more sober, and deeper evaluation into the kinds of questions this trilogy tried to tackle. It is strange that the story is an even darker scenario for humanity than AOT, and yet every major conflict has a clear theme and anti-theme, a kind of moral simplicity that should leave a story that intends to demonize religion. Because most criticisms of religion are that rigid moral simplicity that extrapolates out to darker, misanthropic, suicidal undertones. This might be a very strange comparison to drop into the conclusion of this video, but it reminds me of the way that the Barbie movie showed a toxic matriarchy as an allegory against the patriarchy, but still felt the need to argue that the matriarchy was better, because we as writers cannot afford to show a bad scenario and let it speak for itself. There's an indecision, I feel, in showing Haruo as an individual, in showing these dueling worldviews as valid alternatives, and everything was doomed to either end in the destruction of the Earth or Haruo killing himself for some reason. So, yeah, I've heard commentators say that this ending is what makes the film truly bad, and I don't really believe that. I think the film is bad because of the way that it writes itself, and the plot holes that come in from the information going film to film to film, and the motivation to film to film to film. But this leaves the worst taste in my mouth possible, because the whole trilogy was about Haruo overcoming these suicidally coded moments, and his end is just committing suicide, and it's framed as the right end for his character. There's a fine line. I say fine. There's a very clear line in this case between sacrifice and suicide, and he erred on the suicide side. This is how a nihilist would write the story, I guess, but it's not how the story should go. Anyway, I should cut it here before I ramble on and on and on about this trilogy. Still watch it. It's worth a watch at least once. There's definitely some aspects. I like this Godzilla design. His power sets are cool. The way that his beam comes out as a smoke ring that condenses out of his nose. Cool to see at least once. The voice actors do a good job. Haruo was played by the guy who played Light Yagami in Death Note. And again, Commander Erevin plays Leland, so you'll get some good performances out of all this. Watch Attack on Titan. It's kind of a heavier show, much deeper. But you can also watch all the stuff on this YouTube channel. If you'd like to follow us, I thank you for watching this video, but you can watch some more as well. We also have a TikTok page, a conventional blog where I write some stuff as well, on kaiju stuff, but that's not the majority of the content. We have so much stuff here. And a Facebook page advertises a lot of it as it comes out. So thank you all for watching, and that's a wrap.